But we begin this afternoon show in Tampa Bay as the Tampa Bay Buccaneers beat the Philadelphia Eagles 32-9. And for the Eagles, Jalen Hurts, he went 25 of 35. He threw for 250 passing yards, 1 touchdown. Devontae Smith had 8 receptions for 148 receiving yards. For the Buccaneers, Baker Mayfield, he went 22 of 36. He threw for 337 passing yards, 3 touchdowns. So, while I give the Tampa Bay Buccaneers a lot of credit for winning this wild card matchup against the Philadelphia Eagles, the Buccaneers, obviously, they improved to 10-8 on the season. They won the NFC South in the regular season, and Baker Mayfield was playing great last night. And I'm happy for Baker Mayfield, and I'm happy for Todd Bowles as well. I think Baker Mayfield, he became the first Buccaneers quarterback with 300 passing yards and 3 passing touchdowns in a playoff game. And he also became the 4th player in NFL history to have 3 passing touchdowns and 0 interceptions in a playoff game. Only Tom Brady, Alex Smith, and Brett Favre had other games where they played for 2 different franchises, and they had 3 passing touchdowns and 0 interceptions. So I give the Tampa Bay Buccaneers a lot of credit for accomplishing this win, and they punched their ticket to go to Detroit and play the Detroit Lions next week. But for me, this game was all about the Philadelphia Eagles. The Philadelphia Eagles had a total collapse in the second half of the season. I don't think there's been a worse football team in the NFL in the second half of the season more than the Philadelphia Eagles. Who's been as bad as the Philadelphia Eagles? They have been awful. Remember, at one point in the season, the Philadelphia Eagles were 10-1, and they were winning games. They were number 1 in the NFC East. They were the number 1 seed in the NFC. And in their last 7 games, they finished the season 1-6. Their only win came against the New York Giants. That's how bad it's been for the Philadelphia Eagles. And I'm watching the game last night, and I text my cousin. He watches a lot of football. And I told my cousin, I said, something's not right with the Eagles. Something internally is wrong with the Philadelphia Eagles. There's no way possible a team that went 14-3 in the 2022 season. They were 14-3. They had the number 1 seed in the NFC, home field advantage last year in the NFC, got to the Super Bowl. They almost beat Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs. That was a close game last year in the Super Bowl. They came back this season, and in the first 11 games of the season, they were 10-1 and were the number 1 seed in the NFC. And for them to finish the way that they have finished this season, it's something wrong with the Philadelphia Eagles internally. It's something we don't know anything about, but it's something in that locker room that's going on, whether it's a player and a coach relationship that's been fractured, whether it's a player and, player/player relationship that's been fractured. Something is going on with that Philadelphia Eagles football team, because over the last 11 games of the season, they've been awful. They have been awful since week 11, week 12. I'm looking at their schedule. I know they lost to the 49ers, remember? That was in week 13. They lost to the 49ers 42-19. But they had a great win even so in week 11, they beat the Chiefs. Remember, that was that Monday night game we were all looking forward to. The Eagles beat the Chiefs 21-17. They followed that up and they beat the Bills 37-34 in week 12. That was their last meaningful win. That was their last meaningful win in week 12. So I'm not sure what's going on with the Philadelphia Eagles, but I do know that there is something internally wrong with the Philadelphia Eagles. But also, what's wrong with the Eagles? They were awful defensively this year. They were pathetic, honestly. And remember, midway through the season, they changed defensive coordinators. At one point, the coordinator for the Philadelphia Eagles, their defensive coordinator, it was Sean Desai. They moved off of Sean Desai and they gave the defensive coordinator duties to Matt Patricia. And they got worse. The Eagles got worse defensively under Matt Patricia. These are the Eagles. This is their ranks overall since week 13. They've won 14% of their games. That's ranked 31st in the NFL. Opponents are averaging 31 points per game against that Eagles defense. That's ranked 31st in the NFL. Their points per game margin is a negative 11.7. That's ranked 31st in the NFL. And their turnover margin is -8. That's ranked dead last in the NFL. And let's look at some of their numbers offensively. Weeks 1 through 12, they were 10-1, averaging 28 points per game. Weeks 13 through 18, they were 1-5, averaging 21 points per game. The opponents' points per game, weeks 1 through 12, were 22. Weeks 13 through 18, opponents averaged 31 points per game. So they didn't get better once they transitioned from Sean Desai to Matt Patricia. They got worse. They got worse defensively. I'm looking at the game last night, and I'm looking at Eagles defenders missing tackles left and right. I mean, they were literally missing tackles left and right. I don't understand how the hell Bradbury still has a job. James Bradbury, that's the Eagles' defensive back. He was awful this year. He was awful. He was terrible. He should be ashamed to show his face in the city of Philadelphia today. That's how bad his tackling was as I watched the game last night. But he wasn't alone. It was players in that secondary for the Eagles that just did not want to tackle for some reason. I'm looking at Buccaneers players catch passes and play. There's defenders that's right there that could tackle the Buccaneers, and they're not making those tackles. And the Buccaneers, they were feasting off the Tampa Bay Buccaneers defensive players not making those necessary tackles. And that was the biggest problem last night. And been the problem, honestly, throughout the entire second half of the season. And I just got I don't know, defensively they were horrible this year. They were bad. They got some veterans on their team. I think Jason Kelsey retired this morning, so he's done. Fletcher Cox is getting up in age. Brandon Graham is also getting older. I think the Eagles, they gotta definitely make some changes in the offseason because this year defensively, they were awful. They were awful. It wasn't just James Bradbury. I thought Hassan Reddick, Shaquille Leonard, he was the free agent signing that they brought in midway through the season. He previously played for the Colts. Josh Sweat, Jordan Davis, they didn't really get to the passer this year like they did last year. That was what made the Eagles good last year was they were able to rush the passer. They weren't able to really get to the quarterback this year. And that was a part of the problem. And so in the back end, James Bradbury, Reed Blankenship, Darius Slay, even though he got injured last night, they didn't really have great years this year. They didn't. And so that was the biggest issue with the Philadelphia Eagles. And so everybody's talking about whether or not they should move on from Nick Sirianni. I think Nick Sirianni deserves another chance to coach this football team moving forward. They just got to a Super Bowl last year. For me, I just can't imagine a team firing a coach one season removed from being in the Super Bowl. That would be crazy to me. So I'm not blaming Nick Sirianni for all of their issues, but I do believe that he deserves some of that blame for their struggles this year. Yeah, there's no way your team can finish the season 1-6 and defensively be as bad as they were and you not get some of that blame as the head coach. Offensively, they did lose A.J. Brown for this wild card matchup against the Buccaneers. But again, I just thought they didn't run the ball enough either this year. They didn't really run the ball with DeAndre Swift enough. They really didn't. So Eagles, I feel like they just was one of those teams where they were good last year in 2022, but this year they had a total collapse. And they got to get better next year. They got to get better. I thought they didn't protect Jalen Hurts in the second half of the season either. I thought yesterday was running for his life. The Buccaneers had 3 sacks for the game. So they just had a very disappointing end to the season. Very disappointing for the Philadelphia Eagles. But we'll see what happens moving forward with them. But the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they're moving on to the divisional round of the playoffs. They'll face off against the Detroit Lions next week in Detroit. So we'll see what happens in that matchup.